Evan, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. I'm going to come on. Do you want to set this up and I'll go ahead and kick it off? And do you have the presentation we sent over earlier?
No, I wasn't sent the presentation earlier.
Okay. I tell you what, give me just a moment. I think I can find copy here and maybe I can share it on my screen. Okay, is my screen sharing?
Yes, it
Can
is.
you see my screen? Okay, great. Well, let me say good evening to everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Kenneth Kelly. I actually serve as chairman and CEO of First Independence Bank, which is based in Detroit, Michigan. And several years ago, I was asked the question, this is actually prior to George Floyd, what can we do to help change the wealth gap? And so I spent some time looking at numbers, understanding figures. And one of the things that I found out is that you look at the African American community specifically, and only 3 out of 10 individuals have a will upon their passing. And so I started spending some time really researching this issue and trying to understand it. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. But today, what I want to do is share with you some of the reasons why I ended up writing a book on this topic. And secondly, why we're really here, most importantly, creating a tool that will allow individuals to be able to go and do a will, a healthcare directive, and a power of attorney all electronically. And so, what I want to share with you through this presentation today is really the understanding of how you can and how all of us can get our affairs, I'll say, more in order, because none of us will do this perfectly, but in such a manner that kind of falls in line with love, peace, and legacy, which is one of the tenets of our company and what we started here in My Legacy Items and how we plan to move that forward. So what you see before you really is the cover of the book. It can be bought on Amazon. I will tell you, all of you who are listening, if you do subscribe to My Legacy Items, I will send a copy to you. I want to tell you that that has happened on behalf of the mayor. The mayor actually asked that we look at providing a book for any of those who decide to make the subscription. So I want to commend him, even though I know he's not here with us today. It was his negotiating skills that got us to the point of where we would certainly be willing to do this. But at the essence of the day is really digital estate planning. Now, I will tell you, I think there's a lot of taboo with the word estate planning. Oftentimes, we think it means something really more sophisticated than it really is. So you'll hear me refer to the term throughout this process as legacy planning. And it is very intentional that when we talk about this company, My Legacy Items, et cetera, we are thinking about legacy. And it doesn't matter if you work in a school system, if you're an attorney, if you're an entertainer, et cetera. And so I'll walk through several of the cases that we write about in the book in this process, but also talk about the use of the actual platform. This is really just an example of that you saw the cover of the book. This is the back cover of the book, and some of the individuals who commended and wrote on our behalf as we were putting this together. Some of the acknowledgments, one from Alexis Herman, who was CEO of New Venture. Many of you may know her. She was former Secretary of Labor under President Clinton, and I'll give a disclaimer, she's a relative of ours. Rob Nichols, who's currently the President and CEO of the American Bankers Association. William Picard, who actually we lost last year, was an entrepreneur and really did an outstanding job in the automotive sector and created legacy at many HBCUs through his scholarship efforts and philanthropy. And then last but not least, certainly is John Rogers. Many of you know John Rogers for his work there in Chicago and the things that he have done in building aerial investments, aerial capital into really one of the largest African American owned and controlled capital companies in the world. But our story really goes back to what I shared a moment ago in looking at how do we change and improve all of our legacies. Each of us will have a legacy. There will be words that will be shared over all of us when our demise arrive. And what we wanted to do here, and part of our efforts here at My Legacy Items, is looking at how do we make that transition easy for our families, but most importantly, ensure that there is a legacy, not only the financial aspect of it, but also philosophically. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Again, My Legacy Items was designed to be a low cost technology platform solution that will allow everyday Americans to take advantage of the opportunity to have a will, power of attorney, and healthcare directive. So my goal in all of this was really looking at how do we remove the friction from getting this work done. Many of you know attorneys are expensive, and we don't claim to be an attorney, but the intent is how do we make this affordable for everyday people? And in such a way, really, you can take it to your attorney and have your affairs more organized so they don't have to charge you for organizing your affairs. And most importantly, what's unique about this platform is no one will have to come to your home to figure out what boxes, what safe, where did you place those items that you want secured in paper. It can be all uploaded electronically. And so your attorney or your executor could have right at their fingertips your information, even if they live a state away, and just basically one keystroke from being accessible to all of your desires. I shared earlier our purpose, which is ensuring that it fits under these three words: peace, love, and legacy. In my process of looking at researching and really talking to individuals, what we found is oftentimes and culturally, we have used expressions like, they'll figure it out when it's my time, or I don't have time for that. And what we realize is there is a wake of destruction in the midst of that ideology. And so while it may seem trivial or comical in the midst of the joke, the reality is we have seen families that splinter forever because of this. I'll give an example of a friend of mine who's an attorney, and in this case, his spouse actually, mother passed away. The granddaughter, meaning his spouse's niece, actually received a car in her passing from the grandmother. And in the midst of a few weeks, they turned around and traded in a completely paid for vehicle to buy a new vehicle. And so the spouse and her sister, of course, had it out and didn't speak to each other for years over just that one incident. And my point is that we never know what may trigger us because of the loss of a loved one. Our intent is to try to ensure that there is as much as possible peace in that process when you leave a loved one, and then being sure that there is love there. And of course, that becomes part of the legacy. The fact that I'm talking about that incident of a car being passed on to a grandchild, which also created a fracture in a family, just tells you the legacy and the destruction that could be a part of that wake. And so we're hopeful that all of us will, in some form or fashion, create a smoother process. There's peace, love, and legacy. Changing times, changing minds, our legacy. Again, I made reference to the discussion of some of the cultural issues that we face on this topic. And our intent is to be sure that we are informing people in such a way that they will have the ability to change the outcomes for their heirs going forward. Here's what we know about this space, and it's really pretty incredible when you get to it and you hear these big numbers, but recognize big numbers are really just a sum of a lot of little numbers. And that's in any of our case, and I'll make reference to that a little bit later on. But what we found in researching this is we talk about the wealth gap. There's $70 trillion that will transfer to heirs over the next 25 years. Now, regardless of what your situation is, I don't care if it's $100,000 or, in the case like I wrote about with Master P, $10,000 to $15,000. It could be the fire or the start of a phenomenal outcome for one of your family members. And the point we wanted to make here is that when you really look at the generations and see how that 70 will split over time, all of us will have some form of an impact on that, whether it's positive and or negative. But you look at millennials, 22 to 2037, 22 trillion, Gen X, 31 trillion, and the baby boomers about 8 trillion. But that is the identified, if you look at this at a macro level, that is the identified amount of transfer of wealth that will take place over the next 25 years. And so the question becomes, what are you and or any of your relatives doing to be sure that that transfer is as smooth as possible? Unique headlines. Let me say this. I actually wrote about Chad in my book. His story was not finished at the time that I finished my book, but this was a headline that came out in February of 2022 related to his affairs. Now, all of us know, and let me be real clear, everyone I wrote about, I consider someone that I admire. The intent of writing about these stories were to look at opportunities for lessons learned and to ensure that their legacies positively impact all of ours. And so I want to say that in a very clear disclaimer. This is never to be disparaging, and I'm going to bring up several names that I wrote about in the book. But here was a gentleman that all of us admire. Black Panther, I think, was one of those pivotal changing moments in Black culture and seeing not only a character, but also I'll call it a culture where all of us could be successful, where all of us were smart and making positive change. And he portrayed that in a way that was really unlike anyone else. And at the end of the day, even in the midst of his illness, he passed away without a will and without his affairs in order. He had recently married. And so the case that's not in the book and the way it's settled is his spouse actually got control to be able to make arrangements pretty swiftly. And I think at the end of the day, at that time, his estimated estate was about 4 million. She ended up splitting his estate with the parents, is the last that I read on that in that process. So that 4 million was really eroded down to about 3 million after attorney fees and all of the things that comes along with that going public and going through the probate process. And so they ended up splitting about 1.5 million, as I understand it. Now, that does not indicate whether he had other royalties or other things coming. That was what the settling looked like at the time that they showed closure of it a few years ago. But the point I want to make is that, as referenced in this headline, 68 trillion of transfer of wealth, is that all of us in some form or fashion contribute to this. It doesn't matter if it's $500 or $10,000. And we should certainly be thinking about and being thoughtful of how we make that happen. So what we created and what we have access to is really a fully digital, frictionless process where you can really onboard and do all of the things that we discuss and disclose here. Pets, to be ironic to you or share with you, ironically, the pet business is a really big business now. And so our platform includes the ability to manage and take care of a pet. That has been added. We've also added the ability to create, I would call it more simplified trust in our platform because we just saw that there was a need for that inside of the technology, even though we were targeting really kind of the basic, basic everyday Americans. What we found is these are things that they care about and things that needed to be added. And so I wanted to just highlight that as something that we certainly made an effort to ensure. Again, legally valid in all 50 states, and all 50 states have different requirements. And so you have to follow those state requirements. Like, for instance, in most cases, regardless of this being electronic in the platform, you technically will have to print it out. Be sure it is notarized properly, and then you can upload it back to the system and store it. There are a few states, a couple of states, where you can do all of that electronically and it's legal. But the point I'm making is all states have different jurisdictions over these topics. And so regardless of where you are, our platform will be valid in all 50 states. Let me just share a little bit of the data. what we found is that 33% of the people who will start this process will get to a point of completing documents. The point I'm making is this is a difficult subject. I found it difficult for myself. I found it difficult for people that I talk to. And when I say that, I mean, we can talk about it and understand it at a high level, but at the end of the day, you have to take some action on it. And even in my writing of the book, I found that that was one of the challenges that I had to explain in the book in terms of it is challenging for all of us to deal with our own mortality. The belief that in some form or fashion that one day we will not be here. The reality is all of us know that because we haven't found that person who's 200 years old, 300 years old. So the reality certainly is there, but it is still challenging to deal with. And I'll refer back to the Black Panther. In fact, this is a little bit of an aside, but I think it goes to the thought logic that's associated with this. When Black Panther came out, we were actually visiting, doing college visits with my daughter, and in fact, we were in Tallahassee, where she ended up going to school, visiting FAMU, and we had a chance to go see Black Panther. It just come out, and in the movie, one of the lines that the Black Panther's father specifically stated was a line that I had already written about in the book. And he basically said to his son, my goal is to prepare you to live without me. And I had shared that with my kids because that is one of my goals. The intent is if the natural progression of life happens, that I would leave before them. And ironically, and I wrote about this in the book, that we had talked about that prior to seeing that line in the movie Black Panther. And my point is, as we deal with this difficult subject, is we understand it is hard to understand and really cope with our own mortality. That's a topic that we certainly need to be thoughtful of and learn to express and engage in a way that makes it a little bit more comfortable by doing it. So I just want to acknowledge 33% complete their documents and tell that little story of, I'd say pathologically is something we certainly have to figure out how do we get over. What we found is 62% of assets are subject to probate. One of the things this program does very much, if you've used a TurboTax or any of those processes where it'll tell you you need to fix things or here's a suggestion, our program does the same thing. And in the case of things that are subject to probate, it will alert you what is subject to probate and how to possibly deal with it. So it has a level of intelligence. Again, I won't claim it's AI, but this is all pre-AI in the intent of helping you understand where your resources are, creating a pie chart of all your assets and your liabilities, and helping you to figure out how do you best position those assets in a way that they can pass to the heirs and or charities that you care about. What we also found is that users are women typically use these programs or use this platform twice as often as men. So there's a natural ratio there that is just very different in how we engage with this. And I know that there are many things you can speculate on why that's the case, but it's just the reality. And we think sharing and informing what we are finding is helpful to help us understand how to overcome some of these challenges. The spectrum actually is from 27 to 76 in general. As you can imagine, when you look at the will rate, meaning people who have a will as they age, so to speak, that spectrum actually increases. So someone at 65, the percentages of 30% doesn't apply as well as it would for someone who is 25 to 30, where the percentages are a lot lower. But the thing that I found in the process of writing the book that I think is important is that I learned, even for my own kids, because they were right at that age, when they turn 18, they are legal adults. And what that means is, even as a parent, if you're sponsoring them to go to college and all those other things, you do not have the legal right to say what happens to and with them. And we use as the example in the instance that they're incapacitated. If your child is incapacitated, and can't speak for themselves. As a parent, you don't get to just walk in and tell the doctor to resuscitate or what you want done. If their wishes are not in a healthcare directive, you will find yourself challenged and could be challenged by the courts because they have an ethical responsibility to kind of follow those wishes. And the point I'm making is that regardless of your age, whether you need a will or not, this process, I call it the business of life, even for a child who turns 18, who's now legally an adult, they certainly need to have some form of a healthcare directive. And I'll be pretty transparent. Of course, that was easier to get done with my daughter than with my son. But at the end of the day, it's something that I think all of us should be very cognizant of and understand that that is something that could negatively impact us in an unfortunate situation. What we also know is 68% of users integrate this with their financial data. Our program actually allows you to upload just like any other program, whether it's Quicken or Money or any of those other financial programs that you may use. You can actually integrate that in such a way that your executor or whomever you ask to handle your affairs will have access to it. So it's not the old way like I had to deal with in with my parents, the loss of my parents, where you got to wait on bank statements to come and know what's up, what is accurate relative to the time. If you have electronic banking, all of that can be real time and stored in such a manner that someone knows actually the affairs pretty much real time and not have to wait on bank statements or other things to come through the mail in a way to keep you posted. So it's something that we certainly were very cognizant of. And the other instance, this goes back to the wealth gap. What we found is that 70% of the folks who have used this type platform have also acknowledged that they don't have life insurance. And that's challenging because one of the easiest ways, I would say, to build wealth is ensuring that there is insurance in such a manner that upon your passing or your demise, individuals will have access to funds that will allow them to at least carry on for some period of time. Now, there are mathematical formulas that are based on what your salary is and how much insurance you should have. But at the end of the day, what this identifies is there's a gap, even just in life insurance, which is certainly an instrument that is used to create wealth. And so I want to share that with this audience because if you do not have insurance, it's something that certainly should be considered. One point I'd like to make too is pretty prevalent and certainly impactful to our community is a case of second marriages, and I write about this also in the book. We found instances where individuals may not have gone back and taken care of their paperwork, and in some cases, the first spouse will still have access and claim to proceeds associated with that marriage because it was never updated and things weren't taken care of. And so all of those create that, I'll call it, wake of destruction that may not have been intended when those things are not in order. And so, again, this is an opportunity when you're doing a platform like this to be sure that those affairs are in order in such a manner that you don't have any unintended consequences. This is specific to banks, but I'll just share the customer satisfaction that we found associated with people who really take advice from their banks, et cetera. I really don't know that I need to lean into this for this audience. The fact that you're here says a lot about who you are and what matters to you. And so I won't get into the details of this, but the things that I would say, and this slide should be different because it's one that I just pulled up quickly to open up. But the thing that I would say to you is what will you do on a personal level regarding this matter? Again, the mayor has negotiated for anyone who uses the platform. We would certainly get you a book, and given the size and number, I'll even commit to trying to sign those for you individually. But we are certainly in a moment where there's a need for changing times and changing minds. I talk about that right here. My legacy items will offer a free book to all subscribers from your city. I'll stop right there and really open the floor to questions. I have an actual webinar style, I'll say, platform that I'm certain that I could send to you to look at using it. And really it walks through and explain it so you could actually go through that kind of on your own with your computer if you wanted to use the platform. But I'll open right now and just really take questions from anyone who has an interest with questions. And if you don't mind, just please speak up because I can't see because I'm on the slides right now, so I can't see any raised hands or anything like that. So Evan, if you don't mind, can you help us with that? That would be great.
Yes, if anyone would like to speak, if they could just hit the raise your hand icon in the toolbar at the top of the screen, I'll go ahead and just unmute your mic for you if you do have a question.
I'll stop sharing so I can see.
My question is, what is involved with subscribing?
So the way we structured this program, it really is subscription based. You can go in and sign on, and the way we have it, I think it's still structured this way. You could actually go and use the program without technically committing to use a program. And I was intentional in doing that. I know this is going to be a long answer, but I want you to understand the methodology and the way we're thinking about it because I think it's important. I was intentional about that, and we may have to change that for some other reasons, but I was intentional about that because I wanted people to experience the program before they made a commitment to pay for it. And the way you would have to, let's call it pay for it, is in most cases now that means downloading the document so you can notarize those documents. So you can go out there and should be able to open the program and use it under My Legacy Items. You can put in dummy information if you like. So for instance, if you lived on 501 Pine Street, you can show that your house is at 501 Pine Street and show that you own that house. It will go to Zillow, and this is across the country, across all 50 states. It will pull that house and show that house as an asset of yours. And then you can do that with all your assets, your cars, your um, jewelry, guns, whatever it may be that you consider an asset, including your life insurance policies, and all those things can be added. And then you can also go in and do the same for your liabilities, the mortgage on your house, et cetera. And it'll give you a running total of what your asset and liability is. From there, once you pay for it, what will happen is you can use it each year. And at that point in time, you'll have a subscription. And the subscriptions, as we got them now laid out, is $49.95 a year, is the way that it's laid out for the ongoing subscription. And the other unique component of this is not only can you do those three documents and have them kind of, I call it electronic safe deposit box. You can also upload videos, message to the future, things that you would like saved that you would want someone to have safe keep over. All of that can be stored in the I call it the electronic safe deposit box. It's called life stories, but you could leave those life stories or messages to your kids or grandkids or to individuals. You can store those and leave them there.
Thank you.
Certainly. Thanks, Audrey. Any other comments or questions? Well, what I'll do, if you don't mind, I know we got a few more minutes. Let me talk a little bit about the book because I ended up writing the book with the intent of it being a conversation piece that will allow for individuals to really decide, you know what, I want to take action. You heard a little bit about Chad Boseman, but this also applied to, I will call them many of our heroes, Prince. It applied to James Brown. It applied to Amy Winehouse. Michael Jackson, in a good way. His affairs were very different than the others, but also the school teacher who, worked all of her life, bought a house, had two kids. So let me walk through a couple of those and then walk through some of my thinking to not only write about the financial piece, but also the philosophical piece. So, in the case of James Brown, his affairs were open. In fact, his didn't settle till after I finished the book. His affairs were open for 15 years. There were 12 lawsuits. you can only imagine what the legal bills would have amounted to in his case, and actually who got to eat at his table is the way that I would sum it up. In the case of Prince, what we document, I think he passed away in 2016, if my math is correct. In the case where I documented Prince affairs at the time, and again, it was not settled, the attorneys alone had billed his estate $10 million. Again, just the attorneys alone had billed his estate $10 million. Um, um, Gosh, his name just went right out of my mind. John, who wrote Boys in the Hood and Poetic Justice, his affairs, we wrote about those in the book. He actually had a will from early on. It was outdated. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up, but his affairs had to be dealt with because at the time his happened actually before his passing, because I think he was incapacitated and may have had a significant other along with his mother involved, and I think he had a daughter, I think, that was kind of involved at the time. But my point is, it became leaving a little bit of that wake of destruction because it was not clear who was really in charge, even before his passing. And so all of those just contributed to that kind of break in family or break in family affairs that all of us, I think, need to be very cognizant of. The school teacher I made reference to, again, had a house, two kids. Upon her demise, it went through the probate process. And by the time the attorneys go through and they understand what's the value of the estate, when it gets down to nickels and dimes, as I may call it, then they will settle it and figure out how to move on to the next case. And in her case, the two children got the equivalent of about $10,000, and the house was flipped and sold for almost $200,000. So that was actual wealth that was really removed away from those kids. And the point I'm making in this instance is this is happening every day, and it's probably more prevalent in specifically communities that we care about. And so I just want people to really have an appreciation for how this happens and what can happen. In one instance, I'll tell you, there's a very unique story of a gentleman who was wealthy, did very well for himself. He had a daughter who also had her daughter. His daughter actually remarried. She ends up passing away. So the husband, not the father of the granddaughter or the child, actually had access to her affairs and ran with those affairs, and the granddaughter was left out cold. And he, basically took advantage of the situation and interceded when all along the intent for those resources was really to go and hopefully be available to the granddaughter. Granddaughter got completely cut out because of a marriage and just things not papered up properly. And so for those of you who may have family members or may be in second and or third marriages and may have grandkids that are involved, it's time to think about how you want to structure things to ensure that they are taken care of the way you would prefer. So that moves me into as I was writing this book, the philosophical piece, which what I realize is we do a less than adequate job of sharing our thoughts and beliefs with our kids and or grandkids. Why do we believe what we believe? We live in manners and ways that we try to demonstrate it, whether that's going to church, whether that is pursuing education, etc. But we oftentimes don't take the time to explain why that's important and why we believe what we believe. And so in writing the book, I did take the time to really document and share some of those qualities, some of those philosophies, and in some cases use examples of character traits that I admire in such a way that my kids would hopefully have a better understanding of things that matter to me and hopefully would aspire to them. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. One includes education. I was a contributor to scholarship programs long before I had my own kids' scholarship, tuition money, et cetera, reserved and or stored or saved, whatever you want to call it. But that was only because I saw the power of education and what it was capable of doing in my life. And I also knew that, and I know and or believe that giving is a part of living. And so I can demonstrate that by doing it. But what I did in the book was write about it in such a manner that my kids would know that's what I believe and why I believe it. Another example that I'll close with is probably one of my heroes. How many of you know the name Osceola McCarthy? Can you do a quick show of hands? I don't know that I see any hands raised. Well, Osceola McCarthy is a lady, and you can look her up while I'm talking because I think it would be just telling who she is. Osceola McCarthy lived in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and she, by all standards, if you had to describe her occupation, was a washerwoman. What that technically means is she got paid for washing people's clothing. And she did that all of her life. She never owned a car. And the latter years of her life, she actually was positioned to make a donation to the University of Southern Mississippi in the amount of approximately $150,000. Here's a lady that only washed clothes for a living and made that type of contribution. It was so well applauded that it even got the attention at that point in time of President Bill Clinton. And in the midst of his highlighting the courage, the tenacity, all of the qualities of an individual who would demonstrate that self sacrifice, it became a news media frenzy. And at the end of the day, one of the reporters stuck a microphone in her face, so to speak, and asked her, "Didn't you want to do something for yourself with all of that money?" And she looked and smiled and said, "I just did." And the point I'm making is that all of us can make and have a contribution in a way that is bigger than ourselves. And Osceola McCarthy really epitomizes and demonstrates that. And so I like sharing her story because I think she should be famous. She's the epitome of what we believe in character and understanding that she can do good by doing good for others and to others. And so we often share her story because it's just one of those salt of the earth kind of individuals who lived her life in a manner that's probably consistent with what a lot of us believe and demonstrate on a daily basis. I'll stop there and again open up for any questions or comments. I'm going to assume that everybody understood what I shared, or um, somehow their microphones will not work.
So again, if you all would like to speak, just go ahead and click the raise your hand icon again on the upper toolbar. And once you raise your hand, I'll just go ahead and unmute the mic.
There's Jennifer, hand is raised.
Yes, she should be able to unmute her mic now. She should be able to.
It's still showing mute.
Okay. Sorry.
Now go ahead,
I have
Jennifer.
an odd
How are you?
question. I appreciate all the information that you have shared. And I know everything is moving to the digital world. And my concern is, and I'm not sure if any other person has this concern, um, is I'm the type of person that likes to go into a bank, go into an office, hands on, and have that face to face communication. How can you express security my items that I'm uploading up to this platform, the safety? I know we're going through issues where banks are being closed. That's the type of concerns that I have when it
Yeah,
comes to sharing that type of personal information.
yeah, I understand, Jennifer, and it is. We live in some interesting times right now, and the fact is, someone knows we're on this call right now. It's just the reality of where we live. There's nothing that is more challenging for me as a bank CEO than right now cybersecurity. It is the one thing that I will tell you that if I am up at night beyond human resource issues, it's cybersecurity. Because individuals now they spend all day and all night thinking of how to quote break into things. And so I hear you loud and clear on that. And that's just not in America. That's across the world, really. But I will tell you, it's an arms race that is just the reality of the world we live in. I would love to say we can, quote, proverbially take our money and put it in a can and bury it and put it in our backyard. But that's just not the reality of the world we live in today. And that's just one of the risks that comes with, you know, doing business in this country, period, or really around the world, is the security of your data. And so I would tell you, with every fiber and cell of my body, all day, every day, board meetings, et cetera, we're thinking about how do we keep things safe? How do we ensure that, you know, you're seeing it with large companies, and I don't have to name names. You see the news when there's a data breach. Sometimes those things are, I won't say they're intentional, but they create havoc. But the reality is, it's almost like, you know, you almost got to, I won't say accept it, but it's a part of business right now. That risk certainly is. And I would tell you, we are pretty old style in the way we bank. We still, from time to time, do popcorn for customers who come into the bank. And the intent is to have that communal relationship with our customers. But the reality is, our growth, if we don't expand beyond what I call the physical, is we will find ourselves outdated and out of business. The trends are showing high percentage of bankers, and in particularly new bankers, are all online. I mean, my kids, they are just as adept signing checks and taking a picture of it and sending it to the bank. They rarely, I bet I can probably count the times that my kids have gone into the bank. They do it all by phone now. So it's a little bit of our reality, unfortunately, but it's one of those that I share your concern. And it's one of those that certainly we focus on in running an institution every day in that regard and running this company the same way.
Thank you.
Certainly. And just to be clear, I'll share this. Let me back up to your question, Jennifer. You know, having this, even if you decide to just use it for organizing your affairs to take to an attorney, because we're certainly not trying to shortchange or short circuit that process. We believe that people should be comfortable using what is comfortable to them. The intent here is to make it easier for the work to get done and to ensure that at the end of the day, your affairs are where you would want them to be, and not by happenstance. So if your goal is to look at, you know, just I'm going to help organize this and take it to an attorney so they're not asking me these foundational questions and charging me $250 or $500 an hour, you can save yourself some money by organizing it and just taking it to them if that's something that you feel comfortable with.
Understood.
Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? Ada? Evan, I don't know if you need to release so she can speak or.
I did. She has to. I believe she has to unmute her mic manually after I allow it.
Okay. Still doesn't seem to be unmuted.
Sorry, can't unmute.
Okay, can you type your question if you don't mind then? If you can't unmute, I'd be happy to hopefully address it. I can only see my question is, and maybe you're still typing, but oh, the question is there a checklist? That's the irony. I think you can use this program as your checklist because it actually will ask you the questions that you need to have in developing kind of your legacy plan. It will ask you who do you want to have as I'll call it heirs or recipients. It will ask you if you want to split share it, and let's just say that you have a sister and a brother, or you have two kids. You may want to give one than the other based on their financial situation. It will ask you those kinds of questions. So what is unique about the program is it allows you to kind of flow through, let's call it this checklist. It will ask you about who's going to be your executor. And so it leaves all those things that you don't do unchecked, such that if you go to try to move forward with your plan, it sends you back to ensure that you've got all of those components there. And then even more detail, as I shared earlier, if there are things that will have to go through probate, it will help you make a decision on can you avert or avoid going through probate. So there's a level of intelligence there that certainly will help you. So I would tell you, use of the program itself is its checklist because it'll walk you through all of those and give you examples of what the answers could be or should be if you decide, to override those. Yes, it can. Now, what I don't know is the question is, can a timeshare be added in the will? What I don't know is, does it have access to the value, as I mentioned in Zillow? And I've never looked at a timeshare to know if Zillow kind of equates a value associated with it or not. My assumption might be it probably does not. But certainly any, I'll call it real estate that's on like that is in Zillow, certainly will pull up and show that inside of the value. I'm just not sure about a timeshare, but that's a great question. And if not, certainly, there may be ways to speak with your company to understand how do you put a value on that share, but you can certainly put it in there. It's just a matter, it may not have the direct resources to knowing what that value is. But the company associated with it, the timeshare, you can appropriate that accordingly so everybody will know where to go. Because one of the challenges, as you can imagine, is oftentimes, where to go, where to look for accounts, and where to look for the real estate, who was administering it. And we leave that sometimes open. And I'll tell you this, and I didn't share this earlier, but it's one of the unfortunate realities of not having things in place. When you become part of, let's just call it heir property, meaning it's just out there and maybe you're still using it because it's grandmama's house and she intended for you to live there and you just kind of live there, but it's still under her name at all, meaning including all heirs. If there is a natural disaster, you will not have the funding for resources. For instance, in Katrina, quite a few African Americans who were living in air property down there didn't get the resources that they should have gotten because the property was not adequately titled. And I say that understanding that on both sides of my family, maternal and paternal, there is some property upstream that is air property, whether it's raw land, vacant land, et cetera. It is air property, which means all of those descendants have a say in it, and it's one of those things that you really can't leverage financially because it's just really locked up and you need to solve that. So I say that to say this is a common issue. And so if nothing else, even in the case of your timeshare, you may want to look at ensuring someone receive it and in such a way that they have clear title and ownership to it and paying your, your fees going forward. Because what can also happen is we see a lot of property lost because there's no connectivity to it. And then over a period of time, it finds its way through the court process and being escheated, et cetera. And then it's somehow just kind of lost from the family legacy in that regard. So all of these aspects of being sure these things are tidied up are extremely important. And again, if there's no one in your family who, you may want to have it, you ought to think of what charity can be benefited by it, and or what university can benefit from it, or what research organization can benefit from it. I'll tell you one of the most interesting comments that I got back in someone reading the book was the discussion that after reading the book, they realized there was no one on either side of the family that they would want to be guardians of the young kids. And that's not an indictment on family members. It's just a realization that, given their environment and the resources that may be available to them, that that was a decision that was important to be made. And I would tell you, those are things that oftentimes we take for granted. And it's just one of those that I just want to share with you that, again, if this is not about you, if you've got kids who are not yet adults, you ought to think about, yeah, it may be a natural fit for them to go live with, a sibling or someone else. But in some cases, those situations may not just be the most or the best opportunity for them to continue and grow the way you may have preferred that they do that. So it's something to be thoughtful about and to certainly put some time and energy and effort into. And again, it's not to slight family. Let me be real clear about that. It's just that, the environment that they had resources and access to just may not fit, whether it's your parents or, again, a sibling or aunt or uncle, relative to the way you've been able to provide for them. So it's just something to think about. Any other questions or comments? Well, Evan, if there are no further questions or comments, I'm happy to go ahead and close this out and again, make ourselves available if we need to do that at a later point in time if there are individuals. But again, I want to commend the mayor for looking at ensuring that the citizens there in the city have access to resources like this. Is something that certainly plagues all cities. You see it, you only have to go and look at the probate court records to see that this is something that plagues cities. So I just want to commend Mayor Moore for his leadership and bringing this type of information to the citizens and being sure that we all have those resources to be able to move forward on these topics.
Okay. If you don't mind, do you have any contact information that you're able to drop in the chat?
Yes, I do.
Questions?
Yes, I do. And I'm gonna leave personal information here. And I also just left a cell there. So if someone wants to call. And so if you don't mind, just feel free to reach out and even on the cell text if, a name doesn't show up or I'm not able to respond. Just acknowledge the city you're from and or why you're reaching out and I or try to get someone to follow up with you as soon as possible. All right, great. Well, Evan, thanks so much. Again, thank you all for your time. We appreciate you all being here. the best of luck to you on this topic. And again, if we can be helpful, feel free to reach out. You all take care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye now.